You're listening to Kate Palmer from sparkletart.com, and today I'm going to be showing you a quick and simple Valentine's Day card. The colour on this card comes from Magicals from Lindy's Stamp Gang. To start off, I've torn a piece of watercolour cardstock using a ruler. I've then used some pan pastel in red and just applied this to the edges just to sort of give it a bit of colour. I've got this beautiful stamp called Forget Me Not from Stampington & Co. And I'm just going to ink this up with some Versamark. Now make sure it's nice and juicy, because if your pad's a bit dry, this technique won't work very well. Make sure it's made really good contact. You might have to press a little bit harder than normal because of the watercolour cardstock. I'm now going to be using Poinsettia Red in the Magicals from Lindy's Stamp Gang. Now you might have to tilt your card for this, but I'm just going to tap this over that heart design. Now I'm going to have to tilt mine so I can see it properly, so excuse me for a second. And you can see that that Magicals clings to the Versamark and picks out the design. So this is just one way to use the Magicals. You can use it as a dry powder. There are other ways to use this that involve water, and I'll show you those in a second. Now make sure you apply a good amount of the Magicals powder. This is not the point to be stingy. And then once you've got it tapped onto the Versamark, you can see this is a lovely fluffy brush. Just pounce it, and what this does is it makes sure the powder has made excellent contact with the Versamark, so it will stick better. Now if there are any bits just like here that haven't stuck all that well, just add a little more powder on. And then I just want you to tap the excess off. Now don't be too fussy because there's another step coming. Just getting rid of a little of the excess. Now I like to do this in multiple directions. And you'll often find me going and doing this over a sink because it gets mica powder flying every which way. Unless you like vacuuming your craft room, and I don't. It's just easier to make less mess. Now this is just going to be the base for my image. And you can see I've got this wonderful design in the Magicals. And you've got the initial colour and the shimmer colour. But you may have noticed that the colour is not quite the same as the label. It's because I haven't added any water, and it's the water that activates the dye. So what I'm going to do now, and this is going to make a mess, when I spritz this with water, you're going to see the dye start to bleed. Now I know this, and this is actually what I want it to do. So just so that you're aware, and see all those little bits I've sort of half brushed off? It's actually colouring the cardstock around it. Now I can keep spraying over here, and that dye that's been in the middle will run. And that's what I want it to do. I'm now going to leave this to dry. Now for my card, I'm going to need some images so I can layer that heart and build it up a bit. So I'm using a black Versamark pad, and I'm stamping the heart onto some white cardstock. Now this is just plain smooth cardstock that you buy from your office supply store. I've stamped 3 different versions of the heart, and I'm cutting each individual segment out. So the first segment will be the whole heart and all of its embellishments. The second segment is this Forget Me Not panel in the middle, and the final segment is the black Forget Me Not text. I've done this so that I've got a couple of layers that I can build up to create a sort of more 3D version of the heart. Now the next step is to use that same Versamark ink pad and a little piece of sponge or a Tim Holtz Distress ink applicator if you've got one, to just edge those shapes so that they don't look like they're cut out. For whatever reason, putting a little bit of colour on the edge makes it look that much nicer rather than leaving that white edge, especially if you're colouring the image. So I'm just using my little Distress ink applicator with the foam on there to edge around each of those cut out shapes just to finish them off. To add colour to the heart, I'm starting with Mission Bells Brown, and this is one of the magicals from Lindy's Stamp Gang. These are wonderful little pots of dye ink that come as a powder. So I'm putting 3 drops of water using a water brush just in the lid of the pot and mixing a tiny amount in. Now the more you add, the stronger your colour, but for this base layer I just like a light wash of brown so that it looks vintagey. I like to check my colour on a piece of scrap paper first, and with this base heart all I'm really going to do is just paint the whole thing brown. It doesn't matter if I go over the black edges for this, I'm just aiming to get a vintage colour. So I'll speed this up. The next colour I'm using is Poinsettia Red, and this is a different way of using the magicals. So you saw the first time I mixed it up in the lid. This time I'm taking the powder directly from the pot without mixing it, and this gives you a wonderful blended colour without you needing to do anything or know any fancy skills. Start by applying the colour wherever you'd like it to be the darkest, because this will have, it won't be diluted, and then squeezing on your brush gently, pull this colour down into the surrounding areas. Now you can see right there that it's much darker where I first touched my tip of my water brush to the paper, and then as the shimmer is used up and as I add more water, you can see it getting paler and paler there towards the middle. Now you just keep doing this very carefully until you have the effect that you want. So you just get a little bit of the dye powder on the tip of your water brush and colour just using that. So you don't mix the dye up at all. You just, as you can see here again, touch the tip into the powder and then use this, drag it towards the middle, and as that dye colour runs out and becomes more diluted, the colour becomes paler and you get that beautiful watercolour effect without you really having to do very much at all. Just to give this layer a little bit of variation, I'm going to go in with the Mission Bells Brown that I used for that base layer of the heart, and using this same technique I'm going to add some colour to the middle here. Just a little bit, just so it's not all one layer's brown, one layer's red. It needs to be sort of a bit better blended together than that. So I'm going to be using the red and the brown on this particular layer just to give it a little bit more interest. Now I won't bore you with the next part, but basically I'm going to wait for all these elements to dry, and then I'm going to use double-sided foam tape, you know, the sort of padded stuff, and stick these together with that so that each element is raised up above the one in front of it. I might even finish it with a flower. And this is my finished Valentine's Day card using the magicals from Lindy's Stamp Gang. When you tilt it in the light, you can see that stunning shimmer. Now the reflections you can see here are from my Forget-Me-Not panel, and what I like to do, if it's black and I've stamped it, especially like pieces like this, excuse my grubby fingernails, I like to add glossy accents, not only because it helps protect it a little, but because, as you can see, that reflection draws the eye, so you're immediately drawn to the middle of the card here. Now you can see this watercolour effect I've achieved just by dipping the tip in, and you can see how it pales as the colour runs out. So that's a really easy way to get a beautiful effect. Then you've got the heart in the background that I've just coloured right over the top of, as you would normally use watercolours. So mixing the magicals powder first, and you can see the difference. You've got this nice smooth even colour in the background, and then where I have intentionally allowed the colour to run out, this beautiful watercolour effect. Now of course I've used my Lindy's Stamp Gang glitter and starbursts, or a colour shot I think it was, to colour my flower here and just bling it up a bit. And I've got my watercolor cardstock in the background. Now what I've ended up doing is just stamping a stamp on top here. I believe it's from Hero Arts, just to add a bit more interest to the background. And again, you can see as the water has spread the dye ink, it's in varying colours or varying hues of the same colour. I love how this creates an automatic coordinating background. You don't really have to do much. I've got a few bits of ribbon in the back here just to finish it off, and of course that, let's see if you can see this, the padded foam tape. There we go. You can see how I've got each of those layers sitting up on top of the other. Now you might also notice that my heart is off center just slightly. That's for two reasons. One, it's a little bit more interesting if it's just off kilter. And two, I wanted you all to see the stamped heart that I did in that first step with the magicals. So even though the dye has spread when I've sprayed it with water, you can see that the gorgeous marker has stayed firmly attached to that Versamark ink. So that gives you a lot of really interesting things that you can do with this technique. Anyway, so that's my finished Lindy's Stamp Gang Valentine's Day card. Wishing you all a wonderful Valentine's Day, whether you have a Valentine or not. Sending big hugs from me to you, and have a wonderful day. Bye. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.